The FCC is undertaking major initiatives to close the digital divide, fund telehealth, and navigate the thorny issue of the power of social media platforms. At the Milken Institute Global Conference today, I spoke with FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, starting on Apple's new 5G iPhones and whether they really will usher in a truly nationwide 5G network.
I'll be excited to see how the introduction of the new Apple iPhone goes. But certainly, I think that 5G offers consumers, both individual consumers and small businesses, tremendous potential. Everybody talks, for example, about the much higher speeds, the much more lower latency, the responsiveness in the networks. But I think in particular about some of the applications that consumers are going to be able to use with 5G. Everything from telehealth to gaming, remote learning, you name it. Everything is on tap. It's going to transform entire sectors of our industry. And that's part of the reason why the FCC, for the last 2 years, has been executing aggressively our 5G fast plan, putting in place the building blocks in terms of spectrum and infrastructure to allow American entrepreneurs and innovators to thrive and deliver value to the American consumer.
Now, the U.S. carriers are making some broad pronouncements about upgrades they're making to their networks. But when will there truly be nationwide 5G?
A good question. So a lot of the carriers are now rolling out 5G networks. One carrier, for example, activating some of its 600 megahertz low-band spectrum, is now covering something like 200 million Americans with 5G. And other companies are participating in our spectrum auctions. In fact, the most recent one we had, it was interesting. You saw non-telecom players competing, cable companies, electric utilities, and others. And so I think 5G is going to be, it will involve much greater diversification in terms of the companies providing services and the types of services they provide using these airways. It's an exciting time for consumers and for businesses alike.
Now, there are other countries that are ahead of the United States on 5G. One of them is China. Are you concerned about U.S. competitiveness given how built out their infrastructure is already?
Well, there's no question that China is a major geopolitical rival when it comes to 5G. And that's why we've made it a point from the earliest days of our administration to make sure that, as I said, we put the building blocks in place for private sector innovation here. The largest spectrum auctions in history. In fact, over the last 3 years, we've auctioned off almost 5,000 megahertz of high-band spectrum. That's more spectrum than was held by all terrestrial mobile broadband providers combined when I got into office. In terms of infrastructure, too, we scaled up dramatically. Something like 7,000 small cells were deployed in 2016. That number has now increased to over 87,000, with 46,000 of those deployed last year alone. Fiber deployment, we're setting records. So I actually think we're in very good stead in relation to China. We've also taken some major steps in terms of the security of the supply chain regarding companies like Huawei and CTE, working across the government and with other governments from Bahrain to Belgium. We've been able to put in place a shared understanding of the risk-based framework we all need to have when it comes to 5G security and the threat that certain Chinese companies in particular might present.
Here in the U.S., there's been a big rearranging in the carrier hierarchy. And now that the T-Mobile and Sprint deal is done, are they bringing the innovation and price competition that you expected?
I think they are. If you looked at the merged entity, I mean, they're competing very vigorously on price and service. In fact, just yesterday, I saw an announcement that they have announced new home broadband offerings, which is not something typically that a wireless carrier had done. In addition to that, the conditions that we imposed on the new company, in particular, 97% 5G coverage within 3 years and 99% 5G coverage of the American population within 6 years. Those are major, major benefits for American consumers. And they're also turbocharging some of these spectrum assets that Sprint had, the legacy Sprint company had, that weren't fully deployed, in particular the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. So I do think that they have lit a fire under some of the other competitors in the marketplace and are delivering value. And that's exactly the reason why I think we made the right decision.
Now, we're about to have a major presidential election, and the president has voiced major concerns about Section 230, which is part of the Communications Decency Act that protects tech platforms from liability for content that their users post. Republicans are concerned about anti-conservative bias. Democrats are concerned about misinformation. The president has asked the FCC to take it on. What's your response to that?
There's no question that this has become an increasingly important issue to millions of Americans, and that's part of the reason why the FCC put out for comment a recent petition filed by the Department of Commerce on behalf of the administration, asking us to take a look at certain aspects of Section 230. That public comment period just expired recently, and so we'll be looking to the staff to sift through the record, figure out what various viewpoints were, and then come up with a recommendation on the appropriate way forward. So I can't say exactly where we will end up or when we will end up there, but it's something we are looking at very carefully.
That said, just this morning, the New York Post published a controversial story about Hunter Biden, and Facebook has already said they're going to reduce distribution of this story, which is quite an active step towards potentially more editorializing. Do you think that's a choice that these platforms, which are so big and almost like utilities, is that a choice these platforms should be making?
That's a good question. So I can't speak as to the effect on Section 230, of course, but what I will say is something that I said in November of 2017 when I gave a speech talking about these social media platforms and the fact that they aren't transparent. Consumers don't understand who is making the decisions, how they are making them, or why they are making them. And I do think that there is a growing recognition in this country, and you hear it in the halls of Congress as well from Republicans and Democrats alike, that these tech giants should be more transparent and disclose exactly what they're doing and why. That's just something we expect in virtually every marketplace, not just the communications sector.